Y'all might want to grab a snack and a drink for this video because I'm sure it's gonna be long. I'm doing my deep dive into the controversial novel Half His Age by Jennette McCurdy. Yeah, just get a drink. I have some water here and I'm sure I'll be yapping. So let's get right into it. Hey y'all, welcome to or welcome back to my channel, Scotty Cherie Reads. Yeah, we're just gonna dive right into this book with reading the synopsis that is in the flap. I'm doing this for a reason because we're gonna get into the way this book was marketed from the jump. I do want to say that the first half of this video is going to be spoiler free. I'm just going to be talking about my general thoughts, if this book is going to be good for you, XYZ, and then I will have a bigger section that's going to be spoiler filled, where I'll be reading excerpts from the books and doing a deep dive into the different themes of this book and character arcs, all of that stuff. So let's get into the summary really quickly. The inside flap reads, from the #1 New York Times bestselling author of I'm Glad My Mom Died comes a sad, funny, thrilling novel about sex, consumerism, class, desire, loneliness, the internet, rage, intimacy, power, and the oftentimes misguided lengths we'll go to in order to get what we want. I'm gonna keep going. It says Waldo is ravenous, horny, blunt, naive, wise, impulsive, lonely, angry, forceful, hurting, perceptive, endlessly wanting, and the thing she wants most of all, Mr. Korgy, her creative writing teacher, with the wife and the kid and the mortgage and the bills, with the dead dreams and the atrophied looks and the growing paunch. She doesn't know why she wants him. Is it his passion, his life experience, the fact he knows books and films and things that she doesn't? Or is it purer than that? Rooted in their unlikely connection, their kindred spirits, the similar filter with which they each take in the world around them? Or perhaps it's just enough that he sees her when no one else does. Startling perceptive, mordantly funny, and keenly poignant, Half His Age is a rich character study of a yearning 17-year-old who disregards all obstacles, or attempts to overcome them, in her effort to be seen, to be desired, and to be loved. So first of all, I want to say that this is not a romance book. This is not a romance book. This is more of a literary fiction novel about a 17-year-old girl who basically is attracted to her 34-year-old creative writing teacher, and she pursues him, and they end up getting in a relationship, and that's what this is about. This is not a romance. And I know that there are romance books out there that have an age gap romance that like makes it like wanted or like a dark romance, but like this, I don't think anyone's gonna take that this relationship was sexy or romantic or needed. It was gross. So I do want to say that first and foremost. However, I think the problem with this is that the marketing is unclear, and I feel like it is intentional to get more people to read it, and I think that is insanely problematic. It's just, even for me, when I picked this up, I wasn't sure what I was getting into aside from just the age gap story about a student and her creative writing teacher. I didn't know if it was going to be a dark romance. I didn't know if it was going to be literary fiction. I didn't know if it was like what it was going to be. And from the way this is written, what I actually took away from this book isn't what's portrayed, I think, in this flap. In this flap and on a lot of other blurbs on the back, there's a lot of use of the word funny, and I don't really understand why. For instance, here are the 4 blurbs on the back at the bottom that says, praise for Jennette McCurdy. A stunningly funny and insightful writer, capable of genuine empathy and a brutal punchline, from Time magazine. Funny, dark, moving, honest, real, uncensored, from Salon. Vivid, biting, darkly comic, from Vogue. Mordantly funny, the New York Times. Like, Jennette McCurdy is a dark humor girl, but that wouldn't be the first thing that I say about this book, which is funny. So I don't know if like these blurbs came from her first book, I'm Glad My Mom Died. If you're not aware and you live under a rock, Jennette McCurdy is a Nickelodeon child actress. I believe that she was in iCarly and Sam and Cat. I was a little too old for those. I know my siblings watched them, but I didn't really know much about her until her memoir came up that took over the world, called I'm Glad My Mom Died. It talked about her experience with a very abusive mom. Her mom dies and her growth after that. And she talks about, you know, the terrible things that went on in the child television backgrounds. So I don't know if these blurbs are specifically for that book because it makes more sense for that book. But the fact that they put it on here and they didn't say it was for her other book, I just think that that is very misleading for this type of very hard story. I don't know how much say Jennette McCurdy has with what goes onto the covers and things like that. It does make me sigh-eye a little bit because I'm like, well, if this were me, I would feel uncomfortable with the way this was marketed in general because I feel like it's grabbing people and giving a false sense of what this book actually is. And I think that that's why there's a lot of conflicting reviews. I feel like either people really, really like it or they absolutely hate it and think it's terrible and problematic. Spoiler, I enjoyed this book. However, I understand completely how someone would not like this. I think that it's for a specific type of person. And I feel bad for the people who didn't know what they were really getting into with reading this book, because I'm sure that it was a rough experience because this book is gross. I do want to go back and say, I said that I enjoyed this book. Enjoyment is not the right word. This was a very hard... Hugo. Sorry, Hugo's over here and I have my laptop here because I have a ton of notes because I want to stay on track. But I wouldn't say that this was an enjoy. It wasn't a fun read. It was really, really gross. But I think that I understood where Jennette was coming from with writing this book, and it resonated with me in certain regards. Luckily, I never had a teacher prey on me, and I never preyed on a teacher, but we'll get into some of the reasons why I enjoyed this book and it worked for me. But yeah, enjoyment is not the word. I do want to say and like give examples of like why I think some people would say like Jennette McCurdy is funny, but like I said, this book is not just overall funny at all. For instance, this book starts heavy and she's with this dude named Randy and in the throes of intercourse. So yeah, it starts off with a bang. But there's a quote here on page 7. It says, "I glance at his nightstand, at his plate of pizza crust that's been sitting out the past few days. I've been here in his dog-eared copy of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, lying face up like he's proud of reading it. I scan the floating shelves on his wall, crammed with soccer trophies and the trifecta of movie posters pinned up next to them. Scarface, Goodfellas, Pulp Fiction, the Holy Trinity. What is it about boys in these 3 movies? Always with these 3 movies." And it's like, okay, I see what she did there, you know, kind of funny. I think a lot of people can relate. But her way of writing, there is some dark humor in here, but don't go in here thinking it's going to be ha ha ha, like morbidly funny, like we're really going to be cackling, because that's just not it at all. I feel like I have one more example. Give me one second. All right, page 114, it says, "Men get so impressed by references, Mom once told me. It's their love language. All you gotta do is know a couple lines from The Big Lebowski and you're golden. I once said the dude abides to a guy and you would have thought I blew him." It's like, okay, that's kind of funny. You know, I have some dark humor. I can relate to that quote, both of those quotes. But yeah, anyway, don't let this funny shit get you, because it's not. Let's move on. The words I would honestly use in the back would be like sad, troubled, uncensored, because it is. I think that's more of a warning for you to go into this book. So there's also not a list of trigger warnings or content warnings in the front. So let me say that I do have a problem with that. And I completely hear everyone who's shouting from the rooftops that this was just fucked up and jarring, because it is. For example, I'm going to read you the first couple lines of this because it gives a good example of what the tone of this book actually is. I do want to say that as I'm reading some of these, I'm not going to be reading the explicit scenes from this book. I will be talking about them, but I won't read them because I don't, you know, I'm not sure what people content warnings triggers are, but I'll give you a little taste. It says, okay, this is chapter 1. "It's bad form to groan when a guy's going down on you. I know that, but right now it's hard not to." That's the first line. And that's pretty much the tone of this entire book. So from that right there, I feel like you can know, you know, if you like it or you don't, with the understanding that it's not a romance. But I think that explains how explicit the scenes between Waldo, our 17-year-old main character, and Mr. Korgy, that's his name, Mr. Korgy, the creative writing teacher, are. It's a lot. As I've said, but I'm going to keep saying it because it's very important if you want to pick this book up to know that there are very, very explicit scenes between Waldo and Mr. Korgy in this book, and there are a lot of them. I think that's one of my negatives that we'll get to later in this review. But if you can see here, if my camera can adjust, all of those blue tabs are sexual scenes just between her and Mr. Korgy. And some of these other ones are explicit scenes with other people as well. So there's just a lot of gross sex on page, and that's just not going to be for everyone. And I'm sure people will look at me like, then why'd you read it, Scotty? We'll get to it, but I'm just giving warnings in this spoiler-free section before I get into the nitty-gritty. Another thing I want people to know is that this is a grooming story, but it's different than any grooming story that I've read before, because Waldo is the one who actively pursues her teacher, Mr. Korgy. However, I want to scream that Mr. Korgy is a grown-ass man and is not a victim in this story. You cannot like Waldo because Waldo in and of herself is kind of an obsessive stalker predator. But I don't think Jennette McCurdy was trying to victimize the teacher in this at all. And I've seen people say that, and I think that is so left field. Like, I mean, I don't know how you came up with that and need to understand what grooming is and power dynamic like relationships are. But I need to say that. Another thing with this is because it's a grooming story, I think a lot of people will go into this hoping for like a happy ending or a pivotal ending, and that you don't get that in this story. Spoiler, I kind of liked the way that it was left off, but if you want more of a uplifting story at the end for the main character, like, you're not really gonna get that without going into spoilers here. So be aware of that and think about that if you decide to pick this up or not. I also want to talk about the fact that you can tell that this is deeply personal for Jennette. Not only because I've read I'm Glad My Mom Dies, but she's pretty open in interviews and stuff that I've watched, and I'll have some link below, because I think it's interesting to hear from her perspective of where her mindset was to write a book like this. But she has talked about in interviews and in her memoir that she was in a relationship similar to this. She said she thinks 18 years old, and one of her writing directors got into a relationship with her, and he was in his 30s, and, she's gone through some of this stuff. However, she does say that this isn't her story. This isn't her memoir about that relationship with that man. She took like a part of herself, which is Waldo, which is just a piece of her, and she said she has filled it with rage, now as a grown woman, and has been removed from that situation for quite a while. And I think that's important for people to know. I don't think that Jennette has to write memoirs in order to get a piece across. This feels more like, honestly, a creative writing experiment. And I understand that some people are like, yeah, that's exactly what it felt like, and they should have kept it in the drafts. But for me personally, I think that this is important in terms of a grown woman who has potentially been in this situation or close to being in a situation like this, to understand that she isn't alone, and to see how you could potentially get into situations like this based off of, your home life, your family life, things like that. If that makes sense without going into too many spoilers. However, this is not a book for like teenagers or anyone who's actively in a relationship like this. I do not think they should read this book at all. It's gonna be insanely triggering, and I think that because there is no reflection on Waldo's part at the end of the book, it could be problematic. I think this is specifically for anyone who's intrigued, who is an adult and understands what their content warning level is. An adult who has gone through therapy and has done the work, if they've been in a relationship like this, or know someone who has been close to being in a relationship like this, because unfortunately a lot of us women have been with weird grown men that have done weird grooming tactics. I think it's just important to know that you're not yeah, you're not alone. And to understand you can see yourself in Waldo for certain aspects a little bit. I don't think that this was supposed to be like a blatant critique on this type of relationship and grooming in general. Like I said, I think it was just Jennette kind of expressing herself, and how she writes so disgustingly and vile in this book. I think that that is the point, to really double down and triple down on how disgusting and vile this type of relationship is, honestly. I think that she trusts the reader to understand that and isn't spelling that out for the reader. And I think that some people had issues with that and wish that it was more like, what's the point? You know, like what's the story you're trying to tell? What do we take from this? And I don't think that that's necessarily what this story was supposed to do. It was just supposed to make you feel disgusting and to kind of see how a 17-year-old girl could potentially get into this situation and this mindset. I understand why that's not going to work for a lot of people, but as I said, it worked for me. Lastly, I do want to say that I read this physically. I did not listen to the audiobook. I wish I should have listened to a little sample of it before coming on camera, because what I've noticed is that a lot of people who read the audiobook, like, absolutely hated it. Jennette McCurdy is very monotone, and I remember that from the I'm Glad My Mom Died memoir, but a lot of people said it was terrible. And in her interview, she said that she actually talked in like real speed because she gets annoyed when audiobook narrators slow it down, because when she reads audiobook, like just like myself, she has to bump it up to 2 times speed. But I don't know if she did a great job, but the feedback that I've heard is that it just didn't work specifically for this story. Just gonna throw that out there. I'm gonna leave some other reviews down below, some that liked and some that didn't like, that I took something from. I think they did a good job of explaining their opinion of this book down below. But that's the last thing I'm gonna say in the spoiler-free section. I did enjoy this. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. If you're interested to go into a more deep dive, keep watching. Okay. Spoilers moving forward. Spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. If you do not want to be spoiled, because I will be reading specifically like excerpts from this book, I'm going to be talking about the entire summary in detail. Click off, read it, or don't read it. Go forward at your own risk. All right. The first thing that I want to tackle, as I said, I have my notes here so I stay on track, is talking about Waldo's mom, because I think that that gives a little bit of understanding as to why maybe Waldo is the way that she is. So Waldo's mother had her when she was like 16 years old. Father wasn't in the picture, and she's just neglectful, honestly. And they are very poor, like they live in a trailer park. She only works, she like bags groceries, and I think that she like dances at night. And you know, they're just pretty poor, but I understand that single moms have to do what they have to do, but she's neglectful because she has this like love addiction where she is just completely tied to these unavailable men that treat her like shit. And Waldo sees that growing up, and it's just not a good situation. There's multiple times in this book where Waldo literally reaches out to her mom, and her mom like chooses this disgusting man over her daughter. So just growing up in a toxic household like that, and on top of that, to see this weird relationship that she has with all of these men and how she doesn't value herself, it's really sad. And I want to read an excerpt here. It's pretty long. It's a point where Margot's like writing, I believe. She's just kind of opening her mind, and she's just writing whatever she feels. And I think that this excerpt gives a great example of where her mind is and why she has like no self-worth, and potentially why she, you know, got into this relationship with Mr. Korgy and stayed and all of those things. So it says, I'm 5 years old. Mom's getting me ready. On a regular day, I can wear whatever. A Pocahontas t-shirt, orange shorts, or overalls and cowboy boots, but not today, because today Dad's coming over, and when Dad comes over, Mom gets stressed, and when Mom gets stressed, we get pretty. Best way to keep a man is to be as pretty as you can be, she says while she glides lipstick on. Then she smacks her lips together and says, it's my turn to get pretty. Mom puts me in my good dress and rolls my hair in hot curlers, rubbing oil onto the ends so they look all shiny. She puts lip gloss on me and a little mascara on the tips of my eyelashes. By the end of the routine, I'm a mini version of her. Dad comes over. We all sit down for dinner. Mom looks at Dad, and Dad looks at his phone. He leaves pretty quick, and Mom sighs. Says next time we'll leave the curlers in our hair longer. Get us some new dresses. Next time we do get new dresses, and we do keep the curlers in longer. Mom puts mascara on my full lashes, not just the tips. Dad comes over. He looks less at his phone and more at Mom. Even stays for dessert. But at one point, they go to the bedroom. I press my ear against the door and hear Mommy making ooh noises. She sounds happy. As he's leaving, Dad reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a plastic capsule from a grocery store quarter machine. Inside is a jelly hand toy. He shows me how it sticks on a window. Says it'll be there for days. Dad leaves and Mom seems relaxed. We must have done better, been prettier. Pretty enough for Dad to stick around a little longer. I switch back into my Pocahontas shirt. The sticky hand falls off the window. I'm 7 years old. The hot curlers haven't come out of the closet in over a year. Kids at school have started calling me trailer trash and making fun of me for wearing the same shirt 3 days a week. I swear to myself that as soon as I'm old enough, I'll get a job so that I can use my money to buy myself enough clothes that I'll be able to wear a shirt every single day, a new shirt every single day. Even though Dad doesn't come around anymore, other men do. Some of them Mom's age, some of them older. They rarely stay long. They always smell weird, like chili and cologne. Mom pays me less attention, so I make friends with kids in the other mobile homes around us. Kimberly and Robin and Angelica. We play hide and seek near the swamp and make mud pies. We play jump rope games, snake and helicopter. We put water and fruit chunks into ice trays with toothpicks sticking out to make homemade popsicles. We have fun. Then Robin moves away, then Angelica, then Kimberly, and I'm the only kid left in the mobile home park. Sometimes I still make popsicles. I'm 9 years old. We live in an apartment now. Mom's boyfriend gets her a job dancing. I ask her if it's tap, but she says, not quite. Too bad. I always liked tap dancing. People comment wherever we go that Mom and I look like sisters. Older women often ask how old she was when she had me. When she says 16, the woman says, oh, or the women say, oh, and try to smile their best smiles, but I can tell they want to shake their head and say tisk tisk or both. I'm starting to notice that a lot, how people say one thing to hide another. Like Mom, sometimes she'll show off a new blouse and act like she's excited about the fabric or the neckline, but I can always spot the new bruise peeking out from under it. I want to say something about it, but I compliment the blouse instead, so I guess I do it too. Mom's boyfriend breaks up with her. She sobs into my lap. I stroke her hair. It smells like VO5 shampoo, the strawberries and cream scent. She cries and says, I'm all she has. That ever since she saw that plus line on the stick, she knew she wanted to keep me, or that she couldn't bear to get rid of me. Which is really the same thing. I don't know what she means exactly, but I know that they don't sound the same to me. Wanting to keep something is very different than not being able to get rid of it. I think that excerpt says a lot about Waldo and potentially why she is the way that she is, as stated before. I think that this also is a clip that shows Jennette McCurdy's writing and how it's short and succinct and to the point. And some people are not going to like that, but I really enjoyed it. And I think that it worked really well for this book, especially because it's told from a 17-year-old perspective who isn't fully there cognitively yet. I do want to mention Tony, who is the mom's on again, off again boyfriend for the majority of this book. And it was just really sad how at the end of this book, when Waldo ultimately leaves, she leaves because she ends up breaking up with Mr. Korgy herself. And then she comes home and her mom had told her previously that she was not going to see Tony again. You know, she was going to be at home with Waldo a lot more. And after Waldo comes into the house, she realizes that her mom's having sex with Tony in the bedroom, and she's just like, you know, fuck this, she let me down again, like, I'm gonna leave, and Waldo just runs away. So I just want to start with Waldo's mom to give a backstory with her, and then now we're kind of gonna get into Mr. Korgy and her relationship with Mr. Korgy, because I feel like that's the best way to go through the general summary and my thoughts throughout this book, because most of it is told through their relationship stages. All right, so Mr. Korgy is the 34-year-old creative writing teacher who is married and has a kid. Yeah, it's funny because we don't ever get his first name. Even in the disgusting sex scenes and stuff, Waldo always calls him Mr. Korgy. I think that's intentional. I think that Jennette does a good job with that, and I like that she chose to add that into this book because it shows specifically the power difference between them and why this is so messed up. I do want to read an excerpt of why Waldo, like, is infatuated with him. She explains that, like, he's just an average Joe middle-aged guy. Like, there's nothing cute about him, but he comes into school and he basically talks about how he was a failure and he wants them to be really open with them because he was open with them as he comes in. Let me just find that excerpt really quickly. On page 11, chapter 13, it starts with Mr. Korgy saying, "I'm a failure," is the first thing he says to us, an absolute failure. "This was not my dream," Mr. Korgy says as he paces up and down the rows, his loafers hitting the floor in a smooth rhythmic beat. "I wanted to be a writer, a novelist, but I couldn't handle the lack of security required to be one. I couldn't tolerate the fluctuating, inconsequential strings of income, the consistent rejection, the scrutiny of my parents' friend. How's that novel coming, champ? The uncertainty. I chose being able to afford takeout from the Thai place on the corner over roughing it, living off of ramen noodles. I chose going to the game with the guys over submitting my short stories to publication. I chose catching up on my favorite TV show over finishing a draft. I chose comfort over betting on myself. My attraction to Mr. Korgy is instant, so sudden it's alarming, so palpable it's confusing. It's not that he's patently unattractive. He was clearly once a prize fighter, once, but his looks have faded, atrophied, withered with the gross decay of glaring middle-agedness. And now all that's left are his deep eyes and charming smile, the last remains of a once good face. The guys I've hooked up with are all nice to look at. Maybe not chiseled face quarterbacks with newly minted abs, but the kind of guys who've made at least a few girls' panties wet with their signature good feature, their pouty lips or their tan skin or their shaggy hair. And yet, what I feel towards Mr. Korgy is more intense than anything I felt toward any of them. So I guess attractiveness and attraction are different things. Maybe what I felt in the past was appreciation for a good physique or face or haircut, and maybe this is attraction, something more primal that makes less sense. So yeah, that's the first introduction of Mr. Korgy there, and her attraction immediately starts. And I think that's a downfall in this book a little bit because it does seem almost like insta-love from Waldo's perspective, but I did like the dialogue of Mr. Korgy, and I can see how it's like, oh, he's being so honest with me, like, no adults ever do that, that's so hot and that's so attractive, like, that's a man. Disgusting, I know, but exactly what I like about this book is that there are girls that do think that. And a lot of us have been in that situation where we've thought that about an older man when we definitely shouldn't have when we were a teenager. But obviously, Mr. Korgy is a phony with this. He can act that way in terms of his classroom, but moving forward in the plot a little bit, Mr. Korgy eventually admires Waldo's creative writing and is like, "You're such a great student. Why don't you come and have dinner with me and my wife and my kid?" Red flag, but obviously that does happen, and Waldo meets the wife and she realizes that he's pretty sheepish and the wife is the one who kind of runs the household, and she kind of notices that, you know, he doesn't act this confident at home. Let me find that really quickly. Okay, page 51, they're at dinner, and it's like he chuckled, but I detect a fleck of embarrassment. Does it unsettle him that I'm seeing him this new way? Not as a passionate, authoritative man, alternately theatrical and composed, but as a submissive, emasculated one, shriveled and passive, his light dimmed. I like that quote because it shows that, yeah, Mr. Korgy came in here acting all big and bad, and he was so open and honest with these kids, but he's actually not like that, and Waldo was able to pick up on that at dinner. Okay, going back a little bit, I want to talk about how Mr. Korgy should never be seen as a victim, and this book shows how at the start he was kind of pushing Waldo away because Waldo was coming on very aggressively, and we'll get into those scenes in a little bit. But once he does cave, if you want to say, and does end up having a relationship with Waldo, we understand that there's this power dynamic where Waldo is being very vulnerable with these creative writing prompts, and it's basically just feeding to Mr. Korgy all of her insecurities that he can prey on. And I love this was included in this book. On page 25, this is Waldo writing that she's gonna turn in to Mr. Korgy to be graded. I am from a white trash trailer park. I am from a mom who's needy and absent at the same time. I am from a faceless father. I am from stubbed out cigarettes and overdue apologies. I am from paper thin pubescent promises. From a back room and a house party, from a little too much Hennessy, from minimum wage and minimal effort, from a regret and a mistake, from one tipsy, horny night. And then it's like Mr. Korgy hesitates for a moment and then nods. Good, he says, and his face is stony, and he says it evenly, but his eyes say something more, that he's impressed, that he likes me, that he sees me. I love that that was included because it shows the power dynamic between them and how he used the fact that he knew she was fatherless, that she was at home by herself quite a bit. You know, she raised herself basically because neither of them were around. That's the information that a predator, especially like a teacher or someone in a higher power that's watching a child or supposed to be protecting a child, that's the information that they use to prey and groom on them. So yeah, I think that's really important to know. Going back to talking about this dinner. So ultimately, you know, Waldo's turning in these assignments and pouring her heart and soul into them. And, you know, Mr. Korgy is getting attention from not only her writing, because he's preying on her, but she's being aggressive and like letting him know that like, I want you bad. So biggest red flag ever is that he chose her as the special student and decided to invite her over to his house with his wife and his child without a parent being there. So Waldo's by herself at this dinner, which is just wild. So at this dinner, Waldo is like throwing looks and stuff at Mr. Korgy when the wife's not really paying attention. And you can tell that like Mr. Korgy is like uncomfortable and embarrassed with it, but like kind of at the same time getting off on it. And at one point, like the wife is kind of like, oh, Waldo, like you're a great student and all of this. Like, do you have a boyfriend? And, you know, she's kind of joking and I mean, not joking, but just kind of throwing subliminal hints to Mr. Korgy. Like, yeah, there is a guy that I know, but like he has a boyfriend or like he has a girlfriend. He's in a relationship. So he's intangible. And it's just weird vibes. So then the dinner ends and Waldo ultimately emails Mr. Korgy. And that email is on page 57, chapter 17. It says, Mr. Korgy, just wanted to send a quick email and thank you for dinner the other night. Please tell Gwen the food was delicious. I liked learning more about the two of you and your relationship. It inspired me. I hope to someday find someone I can look at the way Gwen looks at you. Maybe I'll try with the boy at school, winky face. Thanks again, Waldo. And then she puts her phone number on this email. So any normal teacher would be like, oh, hell no. Like, I can't have a relationship with this student. But then we get to the point where now Mr. Korgy is being active in this and he chooses to text his student. So let's find where that's at. So then Mr. Korgy basically calls her on Thanksgiving. And he like lets it be known that his wife is gone and trying to act like, oh, like I'm not being irresponsible. And Waldo's straight up and was like, well, if you want company while Gwen's out of town, we can meet up, go on a walk or something. This is page 61. It says the offer hangs in the air for a second, the kind of second where a full 4-course meal of emotions is devoured within it. Regret, then nervousness, then anticipation, then dread, all chewed and swallowed and partially digested, mixed with saliva and swirling around, just waiting and waiting and waiting. Shoot, Waldo, he says, and I already start rotting. You know what? I should probably be responsible. I've got a lot on my plate with Gwen out of the house, chores and work and whatever else, but it's been great talking with you. So it shows that he denies it or pushes it down, even though he's texting his student, so he's still in the wrong. But then eventually he gets drunk with his buddies and he hits her up and was like, hey, can we actually go on this walk? And they go on this walk. They go on this walk and they're kind of talking and Waldo slips on a patch of ice, or Mr. Korgy does. One of them, there's a weird tussle thing and Waldo just assumes that he's letting in for a kiss and she kisses him. Okay, I found that scene, and I do want to say this is not the drunk scene. So when he does ultimately text her, he's not drunk at this part. That happens later in the book that we'll get to. Which is even funnier that he's just by himself and was just like, oh, actually, let me text my student. Let's like go on a walk. On page 64, it says he texted, finished up some work a bit earlier than expected if you still want to go on that walk. So here it goes. So Waldo is going on this walk. They're talking. He's talking about some of his interests. He's getting a lot more information about her and how she grew up and how he can prey on her more easily. And then here's the part where they kiss for the first time. And then I slip on a patch of ice and he reaches his arm out to grab mine and keep me from falling. And I smell him and I feel him and my ears burn and my heart pounds so fast. I feel it in my throat, and before I know what happens, I'm leaning toward him, my lips getting closer and closer to his until finally they touch. Oh my God, he says, pulling away. He stands there in front of me, arms at his side, frozen. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm not gonna read this whole thing because I feel like it can be a little triggering, but ultimately at this point, he's still kind of like, nah, like, I'll get in so much trouble with this, like, we can't do this, and don't ever talk about this again, right? Then I believe Mr. Korgy, like, takes Waldo home, drops her off, and they don't really talk. And then Waldo goes to school and a substitute teacher shows up and we realize that Mr. Korgy has been gone. He's been gone for like a week or two. And Waldo's like starting to spiral of being like, what happened? Like, did I come on too strong? And she's kind of freaking out. And she's becoming like really obsessive with him too. Like she's like stalking him on Instagram and like doing dirty stuff with his pictures, and like it's just a lot. And ultimately we get to winter formal at her school, and at some point she like sneaks away to go to like his classroom because she's being really creepy and like trying to like sniff his seat and like his stuff because she like misses him so much. But of course he's there. So some of these situations that are happening, it's just like, yeah, of course, in order to move the plot forward, but he's there because he's just catching up on work. And this is the first like explicit scene between them aside from just a kiss. Don't worry, I'm not gonna read that scene, but this scene is interesting because Waldo basically gives him a hug because Waldo didn't know this whole time that he was gone away, not because he was trying to avoid her, but because his dad had passed away and he had to take care of that situation. So she asked him like, oh, can I give you a hug? And of course he's like, yeah, you can give me a hug. And then it just morphs into, they don't actually have sex with this, but it turns into like a dry humping situation. And this scene is weird because it shows Waldo being very predatory because she's, grabbing him, doing all these things, and he's explicitly saying no multiple times on page while still actively being in the moment and ultimately like basically ejaculating from this dry humping situation. Like, it's a lot. But as I've said, he is not the victim. He's still a grown-ass man who knows better than to engage with his teenage student. Sorry, my cat is chasing a fly right now. Yeah, I think I need to nail that in, that yes, he didn't give consent, but there is no consent to give because it's a minor. Like, so just know that, please. So moving forward, Mr. Korgy is like, hey, Waldo, can we meet at a cafe? And at this cafe, basically he's like, we can't do this, even though they already did the dirty stuff in his classroom. But like, that was a mistake. I have a wife, I have a kid, like we can't do this. But then ultimately, this is the drunk scene. A couple days later that night, I can't remember, he gets drunk and then he drunkenly calls Waldo and it's like, hey, can I come over? And he goes to Waldo's house, and of course Waldo's there alone because her mom is like never there and she's neglectful. And that's the first time they explicitly have sex on page. And as I've said many, many times, Jennette McCurdy does not shy away from any detail, and it is very hard to read. All right, so then this scene takes off this sexual relationship that they have, and there were a lot of sex scenes. That's kind of a problem that I have with it, which I'll get into a little bit later, but we're just kind of going through the day-to-day. Waldo does have a part-time job at Victoria's Secret, which I'll also talk about in a little bit. So she's, taking whatever time she can on breaks to meet up with him, and like he's sneaking out whenever he can so they can hook up, and they're hooking up in cars and all of these different places. And eventually, Mr. Korgy tells Waldo, like, hey, I'm gonna be gone for a week. I forgot about this vacation that I had planned with my wife. And Waldo kind of spirals at that point, and he's like, instead of texting me, like, can you email me and I'll still respond to you while I'm gone? Of course, she's emailing and he's like not responding back. And when he comes back, they meet up and he basically like breaks things off with her. He said that he had the clarity when he was there with his wife that they can't do this anymore, yada, yada, yada. I'm gonna read part of that scene where the breakup happens, and it's on page 162. It says, I noted how he carefully avoided the word breakup, choosing instead to go for more open-ended words, softer words, curated words, break, space, process, time, friends, recalibrate. Words that I know better than to believe because I've heard Mom relay them to me dozens of times with wild, hungry hope behind her eyes. No, it's not a breakup, she'll say to me. It's a break, just a break. Or, he said he still really wants to stay friends. Or, he just needs a little space, time to process. But he's coming back. I know he's coming back, Wally. And the worst part is he does. He always comes back. That's why he says those softer words in the first place, to keep his options open, so that when he gets especially lonely and horny one night, he has her, still hoping, still an option, her receiving him with open arms and a steaming vagina. Her, who he can come back to, cashing in on the empty promises of his softer words with a brief stint where he tries her on for size a couple last times just to confirm what he already knows, that he's moved on and is ready to discard her. But knowing better than to believe his words does nothing when you love the guy. If you love him, you just believe them. You believe him. You need to. You cling to his promises. You say stupid things. You say, but I love you. I like that passage because it shows just how much her mom's off and on relationships with these dudes affects her, and how she views the term I love you, which is just really sad. Also in this scene where, he's breaking up with her and stuff, she does say I love you to him, and they keep talking and talking, and that chapter ends on page 164. She's like, I keep hugging him and he keeps crying until he has to leave. The door shuts behind him and I stare at it. I was so caught up in his speeches and his feelings and him that I only now realize that technically he never said he loves me back. So this is the first breakup, right? And if that's what you can call it, this shit's so weird. And time keeps passing, she's living life in high school. She even starts dating this dude named Nolan, who we'll get to in a little bit. And fast forward a bit, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes and I'm not forgetting anything. Then prom happens. And prom is held at this hotel, and she goes with Nolan, and Mr. Korgy is there and is a chaperone there. And they basically have sex in one of the hotel bathrooms, and it just kind of sparks this stuff up yet again. So yeah, Mr. Korgy sees her and he's like, I miss you so much. I made a mistake. Like, you gave me so much fun and life and yada, yada, yada. What all these men say to these girls to make them feel special. And they kick off this relationship again, the secretive relationship. Then we get to probably the biggest scene in this book, which is Mr. Korgy sneaks Waldo over to his house while his wife is out, and they are having sex in his bed, like him and his wife's bed. And Waldo is on her period. And Jennette McCurdy made this basically like a horror scene. It was absolutely disgusting. Do I think that she went too far with this? For me, no. I think that it was a really gross scene. And I think sometimes when you're 17 years old, you need a situation like this to happen for you to finally have clarity. So the sex scene, this period sex scene, is very explicit, but at some point his wife comes home and, they're scrambling, and he throws Waldo's naked ass into the closet, and his wife comes up and he scrambles and he gets together and she gets into the shower. And as she's in the closet, basically because she's on her period, and she's naked and she's just squatting, she's trying to catch her blood in the closet so that it doesn't stain the carpet. And some people were just I literally cannot read that scene, and it was so disturbing, which it is, but I don't know. I mean, not saying that it was fine or I liked it. I don't know how to talk about it, but I like how disgusting Jennette made this, and like literally a visceral reaction when reading these scenes, because that's exactly how you should feel about these relationships and, you know, relationships that happen. So yeah, it didn't bother me as much as other people. Like, it was disgusting, but it wasn't like, why the hell would she ever write this? Some people might think it's a little bit too much shock value, but like, I'm a person who reads like extreme horror, and so like that stuff doesn't bother me. I seek some of that stuff out sometimes, and I get that if that's not how you read, then, you know, that's okay. But maybe Jeanette should dabble into horror, because that read kind of like a horror scene. But anyway, after this happens, then Waldo realizes like, oh nah, like I can't be doing this anymore. So then she breaks up with Mr. Korgy. And then Mr. Korgy spirals. So if you can see here on chapter 68, this whole chapter is basically him just spiraling and just texting and texting and texting Waldo, and Waldo doesn't say anything back, and yeah, it's a pretty funny chapter. But eventually, you know, after some days go by, then Mr. Corey is just kind of like, hey, like, can I make it up to you? Can we like go out to dinner and like let me explain myself? And Waldo, poor Waldo, is like, sure, like, why the fuck not? Like, I'm gonna give it a try. And basically they go to this dinner, and Mr. Corky is like, all right, if you want me, like, I'm gonna leave my wife. Like, I'm gonna leave my wife. And Waldo's just kind of like, bullshit, dude. But then he does. He leaves his wife, divorces his wife, and he has a kid too. So he's just kicked out. And after that happens, you know, they're back together, and he gets this fancy hotel, and they have all kinds of sex and stuff. But at this point, Waldo is realizing, you know, I don't really like this guy. Like, I'm kind of over this. Like, now that she has him fully, she's starting to now be like, I don't, what am I doing here type of situation, which is interesting. We'll get into more about Waldo herself, but time passes, you know, they're kind of in a relationship. It's not like they're like openly telling people that they're in a relationship or anything, but eventually like Waldo turns 18, she graduates. Now he's not her teacher anymore, and they're a little bit more open, you know, because before it was like if he was picking her up or anything, like she had to like duck her head as they were driving, and just disgusting, to trying to keep it a secret, but they don't have to do that as much anymore. However, still, I don't care if she turned 18. I don't care if he's not her teacher anymore. Like, this relationship obviously should not be happening, just to put it out there. Okay, so this is the point where Waldo is basically having a conversation with Mr. Corgi, and he starts to like gaslight her and stuff, which is interesting. So this is page 261. She said, you know, I say, maybe I'm just not what you're looking for. There's a heavy, suffocating silence between us. Corgi is motionless, his face blank and unreadable. Then he shuts his eyes, and for a second I think he's letting the tranquility ripple through him as he realizes he agrees. But then he opens them again, and they're blazing, and he slams his fist down on the end table next to him. Fuck, he yells. I knew this would happen. I knew this would happen. You're a pursuer, a chaser. You want and you want and you want, and you're fucking ravenous about it. It consumes you. And then once you get what you want, you don't want it anymore. It's the most immature thing about you. Well, I'm sorry I'm so immature. I guess that's what happened when you date an 18-year-old. He smirks a scorned, ridiculing smirk, and bites his lip, biting down his anger. Right, of course. Convenient, isn't it? You're an adult when you want me to leave my family, and you're a kid when you want to leave me. There's a flash of something new in our shared look, a certain disgust that hasn't been there before, a glimpse into just how much resentment has stacked up, and it's unnerving. I like that passage just to show, like, Mr. Corgi's big baby ass, when she now is telling him something that she doesn't like and doesn't want to be in the relationship, he's like, oh yeah, see, like, even though this whole time I've told you you're so smart and you're so witty and you're not like other girls, now all of a sudden when she's standing up for herself and has autonomy, like, she's the immature one and he's the big wise guy. Just typical. And I think that Jennette McCurdy wrote that scene so well. So then the time passes, and Mr. Corgi decides that he wants to take Waldo to this Hawaii vacation so that they can just go on vacation and like figure things out and like, you know, rekindle the spark. Blech. And the book basically ends with Waldo showing up to the airport and everything, and then realizing once she's at the gate, like, I don't want to do this. And she just leaves. And then, as I mentioned before, she goes to her house and realizes that her mom is having sex with this Tony stupid guy. And she's just like, I'm over this. She packs her bags and she leaves. And that is where the book ends. I'm going to read the last chapter here, which is chapter 88. It says, "My hand's out the window like a singer in a 90s music video. I yank my hair tie out and let my curls blow in the wind. I'm halfway to C word, a dozen calls deep from Korgy and 6 from Mom when I finally shut off my phone. Maybe it's all the same. Korgy and pants and YouTube and makeup and sweaters and junk food and sex. Maybe they're all just distractions from me. But right now, me feels okay. No chaos, no turmoil, no endless list of wants. Right now, I don't want for anything." And that's it. So I can understand people were like, that's it? Like, there was no reflection on page with Waldo. And I'm okay with that. I'm just glad that Waldo decided to have some worth, which we'll get into that theme in a second, and just leave. I liked it. Okay, so enough about Mr. Korgy, and now you have pretty much the full summary of this story. So now I'm going to get into a couple of themes that stood out for me that I think Jennette McCurdy really put the nail on the head on, and I liked. And then we're going to get into Waldo's transformation throughout this book. So to start, I want to talk about consumerism. Consumerism is a heavy theme in this story because Waldo is a compulsive shopper. Online shopping, she always has stuff in her carts. She's buying stuff that she knows she's not going to like, returning it, feeling embarrassed, and just going through this whole cycle that we can all relate to. Other things for consumerism I have written down, like obsessive online shopping, binge eating is something that I picked up on in here, buyer's remorse, just filling the void, and corporations profiting off of young women's or girls' insecurity. So I want to read a passage about that because Waldo works for Victoria's Secret, which I like that she works at Victoria's Secret because that just is exactly the biggest corporation that profits off of insecurities of women and girls' bodies. And yeah, like Victoria's Secret literally tries to define like what the standard beauty and size is for women. So anyway, I'm gonna read this passage. It's on page 14. It said, "I needed this reminder of one of the benefits of working at Victoria's Secret, helping women feel better about themselves. It doesn't take much. Sometimes just a well-fitted bra, yank those tits up and self-worth comes with it." So it's like kind of humor there, but also real. Then she's talking about this mall that she works in, and she's like, the last remaining survivors of this like dying mall are the ones that cater to selling women's self-esteem in a jar, Lush, a bottle, Bath and Body Works, a powder, Sephora, a handbag, Michael Kors, or a bra, Victoria's Secret. We also have a food court. So it's like, yeah, just talking about capitalism, consumerism, especially for women and how we just can't escape it. So with that goes another theme of worth in this story and how Waldo just has no self-worth and is kind of trying to fill that with not only sex but also materialistic items. And I want to read a passage here. It's on page 47. This is right before she's getting ready to go over to Mr. Korgy's house for that first dinner with his wife. And I think it's interesting how Jennette writes like all of these things women have to do, like the full body shower and trying to rush because you don't have a lot of time. And she writes that very well. I'm not going to read that, but I want to read this section. It says, "And now I am doing it, making myself beautiful, or at least bringing my attractiveness up a point or two. It might seem like a lot of labor for only a mild improvement, but it's not about the improvement. It's about the effort and what the effort communicates to me, that I'm worthy of this attention, this head to toe scrumptiousness, or at least he is." So you can just see there, it's like she's not even doing that for herself. Like, she's doing it for the gaze of a man who is Mr. Korgy in this situation. And I have a couple more examples about that. Just give me 1 second. All right, the second example is on page 92. This is when she's meeting Mr. Korgy for coffee the first time. And she says, "All efforts, I assume, to keep this meeting as discreet as possible. I don't know if I'm supposed to be offended or ashamed or embarrassed to be someone's secret, their stressor, or maybe their regret, but I'm not. It almost doesn't matter what I am to him, just that I'm something to him. Like being something to him makes me something." Like, that's so sad. That's so sad. Another passage that talks about being worthy in the eyes of a man or wanting male attention or just not knowing your worth. On page 127, it says, I'm used to the person I'm dating or sleeping with, or whatever it is, telling me all the things I ought to know instead of getting to know me. It's how men or boys, or both, communicate. They quote and they riff and they raft and they explain and they explain and they explain. And the fact that she just assumes that that's just all men and that's all that she's seen because she has no great examples just is very powerful, I think. All right, and the last example I have, which I'm not going to read much of it, but chapter 41, this is when she's getting ready because Mr. Korgy is supposed to be taking her out for her 18th birthday dinner. And literally the whole chapter is her, multiple pages of her just running around, doing face masks, shaving, trying on this outfit and that outfit. And the amount of page space for this one date was intentional, I think. And right at the last second, like I think he was supposed to show up at like 4 p.m. As she's dressed and rushing, it says at like 3:57, he texts basically like, hey, pretty lady, I'm so sorry I can't make it. I was so looking forward to seeing you, but Gwen and I got in a tiff and I'm stuck doing damage control. I'm doubly sorry for the last minute nature of this. Just notice the time. It's been hectic to say the least. I'll make it up to you soon, I promise. And then it says, I collapsed over myself, hyperventilating, tears and snot oozing out of me as I type my response. No prob. Just the fact that, Jennette wrote 1, 2, 3, like 3.5 pages of her getting ready for this and for it to end that way was smart. Was very smart. Okay, the next theme I want to talk about is class and how Waldo feels like everyone is just pitying her because she is poor, and that her mom's not really around, and her mom had her when she was young and her father's not there. And a great example of this is, I don't think I've talked about Franny. So Franny is her childhood friend who is a Mormon and has a nice house, and it's a situation where like Waldo always goes over to their house, but Franny like never comes over to Waldo's house. And I'm gonna read a passage about that in a second. But I did want to say that this scene where Franny goes to the Mormon temple or church, she realizes that this sermon is talking about how Mormons need to befriend the poor and the people that they feel bad for. And Waldo says during the sermon, I looked over and Franny's eyes were lit up with recognition, hearing herself in the words as she sat at the edge of her seat, almost falling over from sheer eager do-gooderness. I realized I was the friendless she had befriended, a hole punch on her God stamp, a fixer-upper to her savior. I was charity work. And I think that moment in time really stuck with Waldo throughout this because she just feels like forever, she always feels like in her head that Franny is just there doing charity work for her and pities her. In my opinion, I feel like maybe some of that's true, but Franny seemed like she was okay. I mean, she's Mormon and like has her traditions and stuff, but at some point, Waldo confides in Franny and tells her that, she's having this relationship with Mr. Korgy, and she's like, girl, we need to go and report him immediately, and she's pretty hot about it. And Waldo eventually is like, for me, please don't. And she doesn't, and even when eventually Waldo is kind of isolating herself with Mr. Korgy, she's not talking to Franny anymore, but it's told in the book that like Franny still is trying to reach out to her. So I don't know, no shade to Franny, in my opinion. What do you guys think? Let me know down below. Okay, and I have one more passage I want to read in terms of this theme of class. So this is when I believe Mr. Korgy is coming to Waldo's house to hook up for the first time, and she's realizing the state of her house and how, when you're a kid, you don't really realize those things until someone else kind of points them out to you. And I think that this quote is done really well. It says, I used to not know the ways in which the white trashiness of mom and me was reflected in every detail of our environment, of our choices. A lamp's a lamp, I figured, until the first time Franny came inside to grab a tampon. It should have been obvious to me just by the fact that it took her 2 years and an emergency to come inside my house when I'd been in hers 100 times by then. That I knew her door code and she didn't even know where our bathroom was. That she always dropped me off or picked me up but never went inside. As if the lower classness would stain her just by being exposed to it. But it wasn't obvious to me. Not until she stepped foot on our dishwasher gray carpet. I saw the way she was taking in the place, or pretending to take it in, but actually just judging it, letting it confirm her opinion of me. Like because we had an outdated ceiling fan or a wrong brand of candle, that meant we didn't know the way the world works. Yeah, like that related to me in a certain regard. And yeah, I just thought that that was a good example of, you know, the themes of class and worth and how that all kind of ties in together. Now, let's talk about Waldo and Waldo's character arc. From looking at some reviews, I do see people being like, Waldo didn't learn anything, what was the point? But I disagree. I feel like there are points throughout this book where it can be frustrating because us as an adult reading this, it's like, come on, Waldo, like, how do you not get it? But she's 17 and just doesn't know what we know as, like, myself, a 31-year-old. But there are nuggets that are put here throughout the book that shows how Waldo is starting to understand her worth a little bit. And I just want to read those passages from the start to the end to kind of show that there is a character arc and development for her, even if it's just minor and there's no big revelation at the end of the book, but I think that it is still there. So I'm going to start with an example to show how she doesn't have any self-worth, and then we're going to move forward from there. So at page 134, she says, "But I'm not any of those things. I'm hungry and hurting, and I want more. I want so much more. But I can't say that, because I've observed Mom long enough to know that nothing scares off a man like what a woman wants from him." So this is kind of the first one that I saw. In my book, if you can see here, the yellow tabs are points where I feel like Waldo is starting to change or see her worth a little bit. So this is the first like real glimmer I saw. And it's sad because it's like she understands that she does want more, but it pounds down how she feels like she can't or doesn't deserve it because of what she saw from her mom. So I like that quote a lot. And then moving forward, this is the first big scene that I feel like Waldo had her own autonomy in the relationship. It's when they were at dinner and Mr. Korgy leaves to take a phone call from his wife. And when he comes back, she's like, "Can you stop taking her calls around me?" I finally ask, a few decibels too loud and with the piercing hostility. So this is the first moment. And, you know, Mr. Korgy like gaslit her a little bit and just being like, "Well, I went outside and like, you know, I have to take these calls," but she stood up for herself there. Okay, now we're getting into like deranged Waldo. When Mr. Korgy had broke some things off, she's like now going to like stalk him at his house and stuff. And here's a scene where she says, it's page 157. "I'm parked outside of his house, trying my best to convince myself what I'm about to do is not deranged, that actually it's a good thing, that it will comfort me, make me feel good, and that he would want that for me to feel good. So by association, he would want me to do this." So, you know, she's feeling certain type of ways. She's still trying to figure her stuff out. She's starting to do not great things here. Okay, here's another part where she's actually like stalking him outside of his house. That first passage I just did was when actually Mr. Korgy was out of town with his wife and she like broke into the house. I don't think I said that. She broke into the house just to like smell his stuff and like dry hump his or cologne. That was a weird scene, but that was from that scene. This, what I'm gonna read, is from when they weren't talking and she just drove over and was kind of like stalking him and his family outside. And it happened to be like Mr. Corgy's birthday, so some friends were over and stuff, and she was just sitting in the car. And it said, "I plucked a potato chip from the bag and pop it in my mouth. I could tell Gwen, or the whole party even. I could run in and spill all the details of our affair, ruin a man's life in a single speech. The thought of it makes my adrenaline spike. Is this what power feels like? Barbed and vicious and belligerent. But I won't do that. I'd never do that. Because I don't want to ruin this man's life. I want to be in it. It's a truth so opposite of power, so powerless." So we're starting to see her idea of what power is and how she doesn't really understand clearly. Like she thinks sex is power, and now that she's like not having sex with him and he's with his wife, she feels powerless. So now she's like thinking about potentially telling them to blow it up, and she wants to have the power. So yeah, you're seeing some changes in Waldo. We're gonna keep going. Okay, so now we're getting back to Mr. Korgy and her are together, and Mr. Korgy says he loves her, and this is what she says. "Isn't I love you supposed to mean something? I took it as a new development that might lead to a tangible shift in our dynamic. What kind of shift? I don't know, but something. I assumed that by admitting he loved me, he was committed to me in some new way. I assume love translated to me having more access to him, to some new level our intimacy could reach, or at least a few more hours together here and there. But now I see it was just that, an assumption. He never said he'd have more time for me, or that he'd try harder to make some for me, or that he'd commit to me in any kind of new, more meaningful way. He only said that he loved me. Maybe it was just something he needed to get off his chest. She's starting to see through the facade, you see? Then we get the first scene that Waldo kind of expresses anger and resentment towards Mr. Korgy. And this is like right before the period scene where she then, like the period sex scene where then she's like, I'm done, and she breaks up. It says, it's on page 206. I bite my tears down as I beg him to fuck me harder and harder and harder, secretly hoping that if he fucks me hard enough, he'll fuck the resentment right out of me. He never does. She's growing. She's growing a little bit, People say she didn't have any growth. Like, I beg to differ. Maybe she's not fully there in that sentence, but then the next scene happens and then she realizes, like, no, I'm done, and she breaks up with him. And then on page 214, she says, you saw that I was hurting, I say plainly, but you pretended you didn't, because that would have made your life more difficult, because then you would have had to actually do something about it. As the reality of the situation finally sets in, the begging begins, the repeated no's and please and I love yous, the promises of a better tomorrow. He rattles off the mistakes he's made and how he plans to make amends and all the great ideas he has for ways he can be better to me. Ideas that I don't hear because the words sound muffled and underwater, the way words do when you stop believing them. She's getting there, slowly but surely. All right, moving forward. So, she broke up with him and then eventually they do get back together, but even very quickly after they got back together, she's realizing that she shouldn't have done this and she's over it. So she says on page 242, the first time I don't want to have sex with him takes me by surprise. It's late and we've just popped a pan of pre-made chocolate chip cookies into the oven. Korgy grabs my hips and leads towards me, my back pressed against the counter. And then I'm not gonna read this sex scene, but at some point, he's even like noticing that she's distant and she's just like, where are you? He says, it's like, I'm here. And, she's just not in it. All right, a few pages forward on page 250, she's like, I pretended to be comforted, but I could hardly sleep that night, trapped by my double bind, hating that we're not having sex, but not wanting to have it. That's what sex is for me now, recreating or attempting to create how things were in the beginning, when sex represented the affections, the desires, the wishes, hopes, and dreams, the longing, the promise of what could be, the chemistry, the potential, when sex represented all the things we couldn't say. Now, sex represents the apologies, the differences, the disconnection, the mourning, the acceptance, the melancholy for what used to be. Still the things we can't say, just different things. So even though her idea of sex is still warped, and I am not saying that she's grown and she still has a lot to learn, I'm just saying that there is a little bit of growth for her to understand her worth and what led up to her leaving. I don't think her leaving was just all of a sudden thing, like I hear other people say. And I think that slowness of it is ideally how it would happen for a 17-year-old, and I think that Jennette McCurdy did a good job of explaining her, or showing her character arc in this story. Okay, the last thing that I want to read in terms of Waldo's arc, I already read the last chapter, that paragraph, but I want to read the section when she decides to leave. So it's like ping, they're on group D and they might start checking bags soon. Where you at? That's Mr. Korgy texting Waldo. This is on page 270. It says, I go to reply to tell him I'll be there in a sec, but my body won't let me. It's frozen. I try to override it, to shove my body's instincts down, tell them to be more quiet, be more right size, be more appropriate and more reasonable and less of a nuisance. Only I can't. And beyond that, I don't want to, because my body knows more than I do. My body's instincts are loud, and they're right, and they're appropriate and reasonable, and they are not a nuisance. They are wise. They are giving me all the information I need. I put my hand on my heart, my tender, sensitive, strong, roaring heart, and I thank it. I leave the restroom, rolling my suitcase behind me, and I walk in the opposite direction of the gate, toward the exit to the airport. I walk past restaurants and candy shops, perfume stores and clothing boutiques, and I don't look at anything. I walk past it all. I think that's a great place to end, the Waldo's character arc discussion, because it just shows right there, it's like she's not only leaving, this love addicted, sex crazed relationship with Mr. Korgy, but she's also like mentioning that she's walking by all of these restaurants and things that she would normally stop and purge and buy for herself when she's feeling low. And it just shows in that quick little moment that, you know, things are starting to look up. She's starting to kind of crack. She's starting to understand herself and understand her worth a little bit more. And then the book pretty much ends. So, like I said, I get that some people are like, I needed more from that, but I thought that it was done well. All right, switching gears just a little bit, and I promise we're almost done with this review because I'm sure we've been here for a while. I want to talk about Nolan. So Nolan is the high school boy that she had a relationship with in between her breaks with Mr. Korgy. And he's the one that she went to prom with, but then ultimately left and went and had sex with Mr. Korgy in the bathroom, and they got back together. But I thought this was interesting because Waldo took his virginity, and she talks about that, and she talks about how it feels weird that she knows that, like, he wants her more than she wants him. And ultimately, I want to read a passage when she comes out to the car after being gone pretty much all of prom because he doesn't know that she's in some bathroom somewhere having sex with their creative writing teacher. But they get out to the car and they just kind of sit in silence, and like she knows that it's kind of coming, that they just need to like split. And I like what Nolan says, and I think that it kind of teaches Waldo a bit as well. He says, this is on page 198. "Look, I really like you, you know," he says. "And at first I thought you were just shy or hurt from somebody else, closed off. I figured you'd take some time to get to know, to drop your walls. But then I realized it's just not happening. Because you don't want your walls to drop for me, and I don't know why. And I tried guessing for a while, but I don't want to anymore. I realize I don't need to know why. I'm a good guy, you know? And I don't want to waste my time and energy on someone who doesn't care about me the same way I care about them. Simple as that." And then the important part is that Waldo replies, "Thanks. Makes a lot of sense." And I think in this moment, even though it's subtle, you know, she understood that it was like, you know, I could do that too, you know? You don't have to stay in a relationship. If it just doesn't work, it doesn't work. And I don't want to invest energy into someone who's not giving me that same energy back. And I think for her being like, like, you know, that makes a little bit of sense, started to get the gears turning for her. And I think that's an important part that I just wanted to mention here for y'all. Okay, hopefully you're still here with me, but quickly, I do want to go over some of the negatives that made me knock it down from a 5-star to a 4-star, because as you could tell throughout this whole thing that I really enjoyed the writing, the story, what Jennette McCurdy was trying to do. But negatives I have here are the ending was abrupt. I think that's okay, but I mean, this book is less than 300 pages, like 288 pages. So for me, selfishly, I would have wanted another like 100 pages to see like a story of Waldo after she leaves and kind of developing, or maybe even just like an afterword of where she is. Just for my own selfish reason, I don't think that she had to, and I think that the ending is still okay, but I would have wanted a little bit more, so I understand that some people would ask for that as well. I do want to say that, as I mentioned, I'm glad, I like the way that Jennette wrote these disgusting sex scenes. However, there were a lot. I went through and counted, and I think just with Mr. Korgy, there are like 17, and they're explicit. So 17 just seems like quite a bit for this 288-page book. So I understand that's valid. I wish she would have cut a couple of them out because I feel like some could have been sliced out. But like I said, I don't think that the period scene was doing too much. I think that's one that I would have kept in there, but there are other ones that were just too much. I mean, I don't know if she was trying to show this was just like a regular thing and that it was only based on sex basically, but I can understand where it's laid on pretty heavy. Another thing for me is that sometimes Waldo seemed like a 17-year-old, and then other times it seemed like she was much older in the way that she was reflecting or talking out loud. Like, it almost feels like maybe Jennette is kind of thinking about the situation as a 30-something-year-old woman and kind of putting that onto the 17-year-old, when I don't think that she actually would have had some of these epiphanies when she was 17. I don't think it was done, it's just subtle. There are just certain things that there would be like a quote that I would underline and I'd be like, would a 17-year-old actually say this? I don't know. I feel like that's kind of a tiny little detail, but it was something that I just wanted to let you know that I did notice that if you did as well. And the last thing is that there were a few like unrealistic like situations or like coincidences that happened that just moved the plot forward, but like even with the like insta lust or whatever that happened early on in the book with Waldo when she first saw Mr. Korgy, it's like I wish that that would have been built up a little bit more, but I mean, to keep it short and fast paced, because it is a fast paced book. The chapters are really short. I finished it in like 2 sittings, so you will just devour it, honestly. And that's a pro. So we'll end with a pro here before I get into my overall thoughts. All right, final thoughts. Overall, as I've mentioned, this book is not going to be for everyone, and that is okay. I think just because I liked it and I gave it a 4 star out of 5, and that doesn't mean that I suggest this book to people. I mean, I would have a hard time recommending this to someone. It has to be a specific situation. So yeah, I think the conflicting reviews makes a lot of sense. I think that marketing needs to step their game up and not just buy into this capitalist society where they're giving false or conflicting information about a book that is very triggering in order to make the sales go up. And maybe that'll be a whole other video because I can talk about that heavily because I think that that is actively being done in the bookish space, and I don't like it. I think that this book is a great example of marketing really missing the ball, and I feel like they do it intentionally, which is really shitty. Sorry, I was looking at my notes. It's been a couple hours of sitting here. Let me just see. I'm gonna say I do enjoy Jennette's curt, blunt writing style. So I will be picking up the next nonfiction or fiction read that Jennette McCurdy is doing. I'm hoping that this was very cathartic for her. It felt like it would have been, and it could be cathartic for other people reading it to know that they're not the only one that has gone through something as disgusting as this. I did want to say, if this topic of like grooming is interesting to you, but you don't want such a like vile, hard, harsh writing, I would say to pick up My Dark Vanessa. I can't think of who the author is, but I'll put it here. I read that a few years ago. It's been a little bit, but the grooming came from the teacher mostly. And at the end, you see her reflecting and understanding how she's grown from it and how she got into that situation. And I think that there's a little bit more, or a lot more, of an educational tone that you can take from that story. It was very well written. Honestly, that one was better. I think I gave that one 5 stars, and I only give this one 4. But yeah, I think if you want something less aggressive and has a little more conversation of what happens after you're groomed and realize that you were groomed, I would definitely pick up My Dark Vanessa. I think this is an important topic for people to be reading, not in terms of romance or dark romances, because honestly for me, yuck, but in terms of literary fiction, so that we understand, because unfortunately so many women go through this same type of thing where men are just preying on kids, and us understanding and grappling with that as we get older, and just to know like you're not alone, and also to be able to look out for warning signs for other people around you, especially if you're a teacher and things like that. But woo, that is all I had to say. I haven't done many book reviews like this before. Let me know in the comments if you like these long, in-depth reviews for books. I had a good time, but I am ready to go get some food. So as always, if you stuck around this long, thank you so much. And if you haven't, please hit the subscribe button. It really helps me out. Let's chat in the comments. Until then, if you've made it to the end of this video and you don't really have anything else to say, put this emoji there just to know and show I can see who's supporting me, who's there, who's watching. And yeah, until the next video, let's chat in the comments. Talk soon. Bye.